This podcast is brought to you by Erickson Immigration Group. Welcome to Immigration Nerds. Today we have on Noah Colburn, who is currently an anthropologist, professor at Bennington College, and author of Bizarre Politics, Power and Pottery in an Afghan Market Town. He focuses on political structures and violence in the Middle East and Central Asia. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for inviting me. Great to talk to you.
Yes, and of course our lead researcher, Luke Bianco.
Pleasure to be here.
Noah, to kick it off, was there any global events or personal experiences that first sparked your interest into studying political structures and violence within Middle East and Central Asia? What first captured your attention about those regions?
Well, my research really began as an anthropologist looking at the politics and social relationships within the bazaar. So how do people within a marketplace interact with each other? But the coincidence of the timing of my initial dissertation research, I went to Afghanistan in 2005 to begin this research, when really the insurgency was in its infancy and was mostly in the south of the country. When I was there, the war crept further and further north and eventually sort of encircled the district that I was living in. And that's really when the issues of violence and conflict became much more central to my work. In terms of some of our discussion here today, as time went on, the town I was living in happened to be about an hour west of the largest international military base in Afghanistan. And I could sit with my Afghan friends and watch the planes land at the military base. And so I became increasingly interested in the interactions that occurred between the base and local populations, and particularly the contractors that worked on the base.
Yeah. So it definitely makes sense that you have kind of this personal connection to this visa, given that you had friends in the region, that you spent a considerable amount of time there. So we encountered your work in the recent paper, The Cost of Working with Americans in Afghanistan, which you have written just a couple of months ago, where you detail this special immigrants visa. So we're interested in hearing more about your research on the topic, what this visa is, and kind of the history of how it originated, and what that kind of looks like today in the geopolitical landscape.
So it's important to step back for a second and think about how the United States fights its wars today, because it's very different than how it fought them in the past. When the United States had its highest number of troops in Afghanistan, it had about 100,000 troops there. It had, at the same time, 100,000 private contractors working for it. In more recent years, the United States have had closer to 10,000 troops and at the same time 40,000 contractors. So we're talking about a contractor ratio to troop ratio of 4-to-1. That ratio was actually in the opposite direction. There's only one contractor for every 100 troops in the first Gulf War, for example. So we see this massive expansion of contracting. And what we see is that these contractors, in the most severe cases, are exploited, taken advantage of. And even in more benign cases, we see they oftentimes are denied some of the same rights that the troops would have in similar situations. So I became very interested both in third country nationals who come from countries like Nepal and India and Turkey to support the U.S. effort, but also the Afghan contractors that were there. And in particular, one of the things that we've seen in recent years is these Afghan contractors have been targeted by the Taliban for their service to the United States. In response to this, the United States set up the SIV program, the Special Immigrant Visa Program. And a lot of what I've been looking at in my recent research has been sort of the failings of that program and the fact that it has not been able to deliver what it was expected to when it was set up by Congress initially.
And you do a really good job in the paper about talking about how, the intentions of this program were positive and kind of, almost mirroring how the U.S. treated allies from the Vietnam War. You make that great distinction between, how Vietnamese refugees were welcomed to the United States, or at least had their access to the United States more facilitated than we see today. But you also talk about this disproportionate impact of who is actually able to apply for these visas and who's getting left behind, which I thought was a really interesting contrast.
Yeah, and the real problem is, I think, the government had some good intentions when they set up the program, but they didn't give it the support it needed to actually succeed as a program. And as a result, the programs received very few resources over time. And in particular, it was just not set up particularly thoughtfully. So the process is incredibly long. It's incredibly, there's an incredible lack of transparency throughout the process. And so what ends up happening is the wait times are so long that if you are an Afghan that is currently being threatened by the Taliban, there is no chance that you're going to get your visa processed in time to flee the country and save your family. So currently, those wait times can be between 3 to 6 years in terms of how long it takes to fill out the application and process it. So that's one of the major hurdles there. The other hurdle is that the United States really just hasn't wrapped its arms around the problem of contracting and the consequences of contracting. So the numbers of visas that have been allocated has been very low. The resources for processing those visas has been very low. And so ultimately, the only ones who can sort of successfully navigate this very complicated process are oftentimes the most wealthy and the best educated. So you also have got a program that's very sort of skewed towards those at the upper levels of society, where those who probably need the help the most are also the ones that are least likely to get it.
There's also a protection aspect. You mentioned about many of the Afghani translators and contractors. They're in close proximity to Taliban, right? And if they hear that they were working with the U.S., their family and their lives are in danger, right? So they don't have 3 to 6 years to wait for that process. Also, with the U.S. troops slowly withdrawing from those areas, how does that impact immigration from Afghanistan and the special immigrant visa?
Well, I have to say, in recent years, the program has been so slow and sort of mired in bureaucratic stagnation that a lot of the Afghans who are most at risk are quite logically pursuing multiple strategies at the same time. So maybe you've applied for the special immigrant visa, but you're also talking to human traffickers who might take you through Iran and Turkey to Europe. You're also trying to apply for a visa in Australia, perhaps. Really, the program in Afghan eyes comes across as very capricious. You send in your application, you get sort of a form email back, and then you wait, and you wait, and you wait. And this can take several years of waiting in many cases. And in the meantime, the Afghan worker is sitting there at home, or in the more intense cases is someplace in hiding to protect their family. And this can be a really daunting, tiresome process. And frankly, the fact that even if the visas were being processed in a more timely manner with more transparency, this would allow Afghans to make better decisions. So right now, if you feel you are under threat and you submit one of these visas applications, do you sell your house? Do you sell your land? Do you move to a rental house? Do you move in with your cousin? The Afghans don't have the information to make these decisions, which then creates a very stressful living situation for them, and it results in many of them simply fleeing by whatever means they can.
Do you think that the troop withdrawal as well, the sort of the immediacy of that issue is going to heighten those concerns even more and kind of make the consequences of those decisions